For the past 15 years, I've been lucky enough to spend hours and hours on the bank with the UK's top anglers. World champions like Will Raisin, Bob Nudd and Alan Scotthorne, as well as our unbelievable Matrix team. I'm about to lift the lid on some of the biggest secrets, tips and tricks that I've picked up. You can't afford to miss this. One thing that has always stuck in my mind was a day out at Gold Valley with the master Will Raisin, and I was lucky enough to have a day. Was filming for Match Fishing magazine, and he was talking about bomb fishing in winter, and lovely little F1 that is. And one thing that he mentioned that's always stuck in my mind was that even in winter, when bites are really, really valuable, that you should try and land every single fish that you hook. And one thing that he said that's, like, as I say, it's stuck in my mind was that he fishes really positive in winter. So that has always been in my mind. And I remember having the conversation with him and saying to him, like, do you think it gets you more bites, like fishing lighter and stuff like that? And he said maybe like 1 or 2 bites potentially when it's really cold, but if you lose them 2 fish, then what's the point of getting the extra bites? And I always remember he was fishing at Gold Valley and he was catching some fish, and he was fishing, I think it was 0.20, 0.22 hook length and a big size 12 hook, and like really positive tackle that you don't necessarily think about when it's winter fishing. You think you should be fishing like an 0.16 and a tiny little hook, but what he said was exactly right, and it's always stuck in my mind now. So whenever I'm sort of bomb fishing in winter, just fishing for odd fish, I'm thinking every single fish that I hook, I want to be landing. So like today, for example, I've got a size 12 hook on, really positive hook. If that goes into a fish, that it's staying on. Do you know what I mean? It's really positive. And then 0.23 main line, hook length as well. So a really strong 0.23 hook length, a size 12 hook, a band on there with a pellet. But yeah, I'm just making sure that every single fish that I hook is going to end up in my net. And yeah, there might be small F1 sometimes, or there might be like a 10 or 15 pound carp. But at this time of year, when it's cooler and every single bite is as valuable as possible, then yeah, that's one thing that, like, spending that time on the bank with Will just really stuck in my mind. I just thought, yeah, going forwards, every time that I'm doing this sort of fishing, I'm going to make sure that every single fish I hook ends up in the net. The first few times I went out with Jamie Hughes in the winter, it proper fried my brain, to be honest. But I've been lucky enough that I've been out with him a lot of times, and it's like a free coaching session every time you're out with him. But yeah, we went into winter, and I can remember we went to Cudmore Fishery on Arena and was doing a little bit on like winter pellet fishing and stuff like that. And I'd always thought that I fished quite light in winter time. And then I was looking at his rigs and his hook lengths and his hooks and things that he was using, and I was just like, is this how light you fish at this time of year? And he's like, oh yeah, so you'll be surprised how light you can fish in winter and still land a lot of big fish and stuff like that. So he was having a look at his hooks, and at the time we didn't have the new range of hooks which we're all using now, but at the time I think it was a Gamma Black that he was using. And when we developed our new range of hooks, like Jamie was really heavily involved in our X4 hooks, which are similar to a pattern that is obviously used a lot, and that's why it helped us develop them. But yeah, I can remember coming off the bank then, and it was like Jamie was saying, like fish 0.10, fish 0.8 even in winter. And I was like, I'm not too sure about this, but it went into my winter league then, which is at the Laurels at Skegness I was fishing at the time. And I was like, right, well, if it's good enough for Jamie Hughes, I'll give it a go. Back of my mind, I was thinking I'll probably get smashed up because the carp are like 3 to 5 pound in there. And I can remember I fished like an 0.10 to an 18 hook, fine wire hook. And like, I think I lost probably like 1 or 2 fish over like the next 2 or 3 matches. I think it wasn't for the fact that if I'd been out with Jamie, I don't I don't think I'd have had the confidence to fish as light as that in winter time, but it's definitely worth doing. And fishing extremely light at this time of year and listening to Jamie definitely put a lot more fish in my net that winter. Well, hard pellets, as we know, is a fantastic bait for the summer months. But as you go into winter and the fish often want a softer bait like maggot or expanders, one thing I learned from Steve Gregory, actually, I used to go out and do quite a few features for him for the magazines. And one thing he absolutely swore by in the cooler months, and even sometimes in summer, but mainly as it went into autumn and winter, was feeding expander pellets. You can see I've got a few there, 4mm expanders, and they're really soft. And at this time of year, feeding expanders instead of a hard pellet still gives you the noise of bait going in the water, which you don't get from feeding micros. So you get that little bit of noise going in, but when they're on the bottom, they're really soft, and the fish just seem to hoover them up with a lot more confidence than what they do a hard pellet. We've often seen, even on the underwater videos that we've done, that when you're feeding hard pellets, the fish will go down and they'll pick 1 or 2 baits up, come up off the bottom, and then they'll go back down and feed again. But by feeding the expanders, they're just down all the time, just picking the bait up and feeding on it a lot more confidently. And at this time of year, when you're going into like back end of summer, just going into autumn and winter period, by feeding a few of those expanders, 4mm, just throwing them around your float, you're getting the noise that attracts the fish, but also you're getting that nice soft bait that carp absolutely love, and you can catch a lot of fish on that. And I've seen over the years when I've been out with Steve on the bank, he's caught a lot of fish on it, and as we know, he's an expert at catching big weights of fish, so it's definitely worth trying it this time of year and having a bag of expanders ready to go. Great lesson that Lee Wright taught me while we was fishing the Natural Baits Winter League at Lindome, it was fishing, it was probably 2 or 3 rounds in, and every single round he seemed to lay it on in the match. He used to catch some big skimmers or a couple of F1s and things like that, and I kept picking his brains trying to see what he was doing and stuff, and I thought I'd be very sly, and so we arranged to do a filming day at Lindome, basically just so I could find out what he was doing. And he explained to me that day what he was doing with his ground bait. Now it was quite a sticky mix, a bit like this what I've mixed up today. And what he was doing was putting a hard ball in, really packed in tight, and he got a few pinkies in it as well. It's not loads of pinkies, but just a little bit of bait, and he was popping a few pinkies in there, and then making this sticky ball up, really packing it in tight like that. Just one ball, that's all he was doing, and cupping that in at like 30 meters, and then he wasn't going on it probably for like 4 of the 5 hour match. He wouldn't go on that line. And how he explained it to me was that the ball sits there and just tiny bits are breaking off. After 5 hours, most of that's still going to be sat there as a ball. Yeah, this time of year, sort of anywhere from now right through to probably March, if you just pop a ball of ground bait, if it's allowed at the fishery where you're fishing, if you pop a ball of ground bait in, just well away from the rest of your swims that you're fishing, leave it alone, and then probably that last hour or so, just drop on it and see what's feeding. But it's a great way of just nicking out them bonus fish at sort of any time of the year from now onward. A great tip that I picked up from Jon Arthur, this was at Meadowlands, was they're doing some pellet fishing, and quite often, probably the same as a lot of people, you're fishing away and then you want to try like hard pellet, and you think, oh, can't be bothered because I've got to change all my hook length, put a banded hook length on and stuff like that. I was in a similar situation that day where I was getting pestered by some small fish, and Jon was like, oh, I might try hard pellet to see if it's any better, if it sorts out some better fish. And then within seconds, he'd got a hard pellet on, and he was ready to go out again. And I was like, oh, what you done there, Jon? And basically all he's done is hooked the band direct on a normal just barber's hook. And And what he basically explained to me was that I said, I don't want to mess about changing my hook length now until I know that that's the right thing to do. So he said, all I do is just hook the band directly on the hook, put a hard pellet on there, go out. If I put it in, yep, catch on it and I know it's right, then I'll take my hook length off and I'll put a proper banded hook length on there. Yeah, it's a really quick, neat little tip that I think a lot of us will probably benefit from. Well, this is another one when I was out with Jamie Hughes, and we had a chat on the phone about what we was going to do for the next video for the Matrix channel, and he'd been talking about feeding these small balls of crushed expander and then fishing either a maggot or a small expander over the top and doing very well with it. So I'd kind of got a bit of an idea in my mind. We met up on the bank and then we started fishing. And straight away, as soon as he started fishing, like what I had in mind to what he was actually doing was completely different. So for me, probably like a lot of people, he was saying about feeding small balls of ground bait or small balls of crushed expander. And to me, I was thinking that's a small ball. And in my head, he was feeding balls like that, going in and catching over it. How wrong I was. In actual fact, he was feeding tiny, tiny little balls. I'll just drop that down just so I can show you, because it's a two-handed process making them. So all he was doing is tiniest pinch of ground bait, put it on the palm of his hand, and all he'd do is mould that into a pea-sized ball of ground bait. We're talking tiny. So that's what Jamie was feeding. That's what I had in mind that I would have fed. And the difference in them is obviously during probably a 5-hour session, you think how much bait you're feeding every time you go in and feed that. And that was what Jamie was feeding, probably the size of an 8mm pellet. He was using one of our tiny little pots, the smallest one we do, with the lid on as well. And that just dropped in there, absolutely perfect. So he could ship it out without it coming out, and he'd go out, drop that little pellet of crushed expander in, drop that in, that would go down to the bottom, and then he was fished like a maggot, single maggot, or a tiny little expander over the top of it, and was catching loads of fish. But that day just made me realise that like quite often we feed too much bait, even though we think we're feeding a small amount. You imagine when you put that in, how much bait is in there for the fish to feed on. And when I said to Jamie what I was expecting him to feed, it was just like he was shaking his head like, if you fed that much, like winter time, you're just never going to catch like the amount of fish that you need to. So you literally put a tiniest little amount in, the fish will come into it, and then you can catch them. A big lesson that I learned, I was actually covering a pole fishing pairs match at Barston Lakes, and it was courtesy of 5-time world champion Alan Scotthorne. I'm sure he probably won't mind me mentioning it, but he didn't do very well on that match. And when he weighed in, he was a long way behind the anglers around him. And what he had done, he had gone with like quite a conventional approach that's worked for him obviously a lot over the years, and his record speaks for itself. But he didn't feed any fish meal ground bait. I think he went for a mix that he's used many times for skimmers over the years, but the anglers either side of him just fed like quite a strong fish meal ground bait. Something like the F1 Dark or anything that's got a lot of fish meal in it. If you're looking for a ground bait where you can catch skimmers and bream and a bit of all sorts on a commercial, you definitely still want to be going for a fish meal ground bait. Now you can mix it with like something like Sweet Skimmer, that's designed for skimmers as well. On a commercial, just stick to what they know, stick to what the fish like, which is strong fish meal flavours. But yeah, something like that's going to catch you a lot of fish. When I was growing up watching fishing videos, and they were fishing videos as well, biggest legend was Mark Pollard. Absolutely loved watching his content and stuff like that. And then I was lucky enough to actually get the job with Matrix, and I've spent hours and hours and so much time on the bank with him. But I remember one winter we was out and it was rock hard, and I was a bit sceptical whether I was actually going to catch any fish as well, because we actually broke the lake. I think it was a place called Green Sands we was at. Smashed the ice, and I'm like, how are we going to catch any fish today, Polly? He's like, don't worry, we'll catch. Got his bait out. I was like, oh, what are you fishing today then? And he's like, pinkies. And I was like, all right. So he fished a couple of lines. He had maggots, he had pellets, and then he had a line where he's feeding pinkies as well. And the only place that we caught fish that day was where he's feeding pinkies. And I think it's a bait that's massively overlooked on commercials, like autumn through to winter time and when it's really cold. But yeah, a few pinkies. If you like, you don't need a lot of bait this time of year, but yeah, if you've just got half a pint of pinkies with you, and you can feed them on a swim quite negatively, but yeah, when the fishing is hard, then it can be absolutely deadly. Even a single pinky, double pinky, and one of the baits that Polly absolutely swears by is a single pinky and a dead red maggot fished over the top of some pinkies, some loose feed pinkies. But yeah, it's bait that's definitely worth having with you on those days when you expect it to be hard. I mean, if you're breaking the ice, then you know it's going to be a tough day. But yeah, we was out that day, and I was expecting the blank, to be honest. I thought it was going to be really difficult, but yeah, pulled it out of the bag that day, and all thanks to the little tub of pinkies. Well, I've obviously saved the best two for last, and they're the ones that sort of I've picked up myself over the years of doing a lot of winter fishing. The first one of those is about float choice. Now, we all know that fishing delicate rigs in winter catches you more fish. Like, it's been documented for years and years and years, and it's been proven that it definitely works. However, I've also been in a situation where the conditions have been bad, in terms of it could be wind, it could be the light, it could be the sun, anything like that. And I've tried to fish with what I'd class as a delicate rig with probably a 1.2, 1.5 mil bristle. And I've really struggled to see it, especially when there's a bit of a ripple on it and it's that light that you can't see a float ever so well. And you can be in that situation and you definitely catch less fish because you can't see your float. Like, I've been there and I've been lifting up thinking I've got a bite and you can't see it properly and everything like that. And what I've learned over the years is that you're better fishing a float that you can see, that's probably slightly thicker bristle, but you can dot it down a bit, but that you can fish comfortably, that you're not questioning whether you've got a bite or not. You can read the bites, you can see if there's a little line bite, you can see little dinks and things like that. And when there's a wind on it as well and there's a ripple and you've got to like hold it pretty tight and steady, like that would be what I'd class as a summer float. So that's got like a 2 mil bristle, no problems at all using that in the winter. And if the conditions are bad and I want to fish slightly heavier float, a little bit of line on the bottom and something that I can see really well, I'd even use something like that, just so I can still dot it down so you can only see sort of that much of it. But if you dot that down, you're going to see it better than if you had that much of a thin tip bristle out. So yeah, what I'll do is fish something like that on a rough day and when conditions are bad in the winter time, and you'll spot your bites a lot better, you'll read your swim better, you'll know what's going on. So yeah, don't be afraid if conditions dictate. Obviously in perfect conditions you want to fish a light float, but conditions dictate, do not be afraid of putting on big thick float like that so that you can see it. Your line can still be thin line, you can still fish an 016, 014 main line, an 012 or 010 hook length, but yeah, as long as you can see your float, then you know to read your swim and catch a lot more fish. One thing that's caught me out a couple of times over the winter period is the sun. Now, you always love it in the winter time, you want a bit of sun. But when it's low in the sky and the way it moves across the lake sometimes, it can make spotting bites and seeing your float really difficult. So what I always try and do now, because I've been caught out a few times, is fish two lines. Probably if I'm fishing 30 metres, I'll fish one to my right and then I'll fish pretty identical swim to my left as well. There's a couple of reasons. one, it's good in winter to have a couple of lines just that you can rotate, but also what you'll find as the sun moves across in the sky, there'll be points in the match when the sun's directly in front of you and you won't be able to see your flow. It's like staring directly into the sun, the reflection of it, and you fish into one side and it gets to the point where you just cannot see. If you've got another swim that you can just, hook the leaf there, but if you can just swap swims and then fish the one that's on your right, then you've got two options and two feeding areas. Keep feeding the other one to your left, and then when the sun moves across, you can then go back onto that one, because at some point it can also come across your right and swim as well. But by having two different lines that you can swap across, also means that whenever that sun's in front of you, you've got somewhere in your swim to fish. Because I've been there and I've been catching really well on the line, and then the sun's moved across and I've got nowhere else to go, and it can ruin your match completely until the sun's moved. But yeah, by having two lines left and right that you can just switch between, gives you the option to catch fish all day long when that sun can be really awkward.